Hello, dear viewers. Welcome back to Nova World News Now. I'm Nova. Here are the key highlights of today's news. Washington thought Canada would blink, that after years of pressure, tariffs, and threats, Ottawa would quietly give in again. That when renegotiations came up, Canada would show up apologetic, defensive, ready to compromise. That assumption was wrong, and it wasn't exposed by a dramatic speech or a fiery confrontation. It was exposed by two calm words, delivered without emotion, without anger, and without hesitation, not negotiable. Those words didn't just shut down a demand. They marked the end of an era where Canada entered talks assuming weakness, an era where proximity to the U.S. was mistaken for dependency. What happened next revealed something far bigger than a trade dispute. It revealed a power shift most Americans didn't even realize was underway. Because while Washington believed it was tightening the screws, Canada had already built exits. And now, for the first time in decades, the United States is discovering that leverage doesn't work when the other side no longer needs you. When U.S. Trade Representative Jamieson Greer outlined Washington's expectations for the CUSMA review, he framed it as strength. A list of corrections. Washington setting terms. But when you strip away the language and look at the substance, something uncomfortable appears. The first demand was access to Canada's dairy market. Milk, eggs, cheese, supply management, something Canada has protected for generations, suddenly became a problem. Then came the digital services issue. U.S. tech giants didn't want to pay taxes in Canada. Platforms like Netflix, Spotify, and YouTube wanted permanent immunity from Canadian content contribution requirements. Next were provincial procurement rules. Canadian provinces choosing Canadian suppliers was labeled unfair. And finally, there was anger over provincial alcohol bans that were introduced only after U.S. tariffs hit first. Put together, this wasn't a list of strategic demands. It was a grocery list. Consumer goods, digital monopolies, bourbon. None of it touched the sectors that actually keep the North American economy running. And that's what made it revealing. Because when a superpower stops talking about steel, energy, and infrastructure and starts complaining about milk and streaming platforms, it's not projecting strength, it's exposing vulnerability. Prime Minister Mark Carney's response wasn't loud, it wasn't aggressive, there were no threats, just clarity. Supply management was not on the table, not up for discussion, not open to reinterpretation. He answered the question in French, a transparent message to Quebec, where the system is fiercely protected by the dairy industry. Those two words landed hard because they weren't defensive, they were final. And in diplomacy, finality signals confidence. It told Washington something they weren't prepared to hear. Canada wasn't negotiating from fear anymore. Instead of arguing over dairy, Canada pivoted to reality. Integrated auto supply chains, steel, aluminum, forest products, critical minerals. These weren't talking points. They were reminders. Reminders that modern manufacturing doesn't function without Canada. That cars, infrastructure, housing, and defense systems rely on inputs that Canada controls. Inputs that can't be replaced overnight. This wasn't a threat. It was a recalibration. Canada wasn't asking to be treated fairly. It was demonstrating why fairness was in everyone's interest. And then something important happened. The idea that Canada needs access to the U.S. market started to sound outdated. Because when you can sell essential materials globally, dependence disappears. The assumption in Washington was simple. Tariffs would hurt, boycotts would fold, pressure would work. Instead, provincial alcohol restrictions produced an unexpected result. Domestic wine sales surged. Grape growers had record years. Distilleries expanded. Local producers filled shelves that once belonged to imported brands. What was meant to punish Canada ended up strengthening it. And provincial leaders made something clear. U.S. products weren't banned forever. They'd return when negotiations were fair, not before. That distinction mattered because it showed this wasn't emotional retaliation. It was strategic patience. Then came the statistic that quietly shattered Washington's position. Aluminum production is brutally energy intensive. Smelting requires massive amounts of electrical power. In the United States, industrial electricity costs are up to 3 times higher than in Canada. Quebec alone produces 90% of Canadian aluminum, powered almost entirely by hydroelectric energy. One smelter in Sept-Îles produces 628,000 tons annually. That's nearly equal to America's entire domestic production. Canadian aluminum generates 67% less greenhouse gas emissions than Middle Eastern production and 76% less than Chinese production. When Canada exports aluminum to the US, it effectively exports embedded clean energy. Energy that would otherwise need to be generated domestically at significantly higher cost. The implication is simple. If the US wants to replace Canadian aluminum, it needs to build the energy infrastructure first, and that won't happen quickly. Canada, meanwhile, can sell that aluminum elsewhere. Europe wants it, Asia wants it. The market doesn't end at the border. Aluminum has earned the nickname solid electricity. It stores clean energy in physical form. And Canadian innovation is pushing further. The ELYSIS Consortium, backed by Rio Tinto and Alcoa, has developed the world's first carbon-free aluminum smelting technology. The process eliminates carbon anodes entirely, producing only aluminum and oxygen. This positions Canada not just as a commodity supplier, but as a clean energy exporter through materials. And just when it seemed the leverage was clear, Canada revealed the long game. When the conversation turned to the Ring of Fire, the tone shifted in a way that was impossible to miss. For decades, Canada's vast mineral wealth was treated as a given, something allies assumed they could tap into simply because geography made it convenient. That assumption is now being quietly dismantled. The Ring of Fire in northern Ontario isn't just another mining project. It spans approximately 5,000 square kilometers and contains one of the largest untapped reserves of critical minerals in the world. Nickel, chromite, cobalt, copper, platinum group elements, vanadium. These aren't optional materials in a 21st century economy. They are the backbone of it. Electric vehicle batteries, advanced electronics, aerospace manufacturing, modern defense systems, semiconductors, data centers. These all depend on minerals concentrated in Canadian territory. Ottawa and Ontario just signed a deal to reduce regulatory burden on major projects under a one project, one review, one decision approach. The Ring of Fire will be designated a special economic zone. Construction on road corridors connecting the region to the highway network is now targeted for spring 2026. What made this moment significant was how Carney framed it. He didn't pitch the Ring of Fire as a gift to be shared automatically with the United States. He framed it as a national opportunity first and foremost for Canadians, including Indigenous communities whose land and consent are central to its development. Only after that did he describe it as a potential opportunity for others. That word mattered. Potential, not guaranteed. That single shift sends a powerful message. Access to Canada's most strategic resources is no longer assumed. It's negotiated. Europe is openly interested in partnering on these supply chains. Asian economies are watching closely. Investment interest is global, not regional. For the United States, this creates a new reality. If it wants secure access to the minerals that power its EV transition, its military hardware, and its technology sector, it can no longer rely on pressure or habit. It has to compete diplomatically, economically, and strategically. Canada isn't closing doors, but it's no longer holding them open out of obligation. The idea that geography equals dependency ignores how modern trade actually works. Distance doesn't decide power. Infrastructure, diversification, and strategy do. Canada has ports on 3 oceans, expanding capacity in Montreal and Vancouver, renewed focus on Atlantic shipping, serious plans for Arctic gateways that open direct routes to Europe and Asia. Energy corridors are being built to move natural gas westward, not southward. Trade agreements are already in place across Europe through CETA, throughout the Indo-Pacific, through CPTPP, and with the UK. These are not emergency pivots. They are the result of years of planning. What this means is uncomfortable for Washington. The United States is no longer Canada's only viable customer. It is one option among many, a convenient one when terms are fair, a replaceable one when they're not. This doesn't signal hostility. It signals independence. Canada isn't turning its back on the U.S. market. It's ending the assumption that it has nowhere else to go. And once that assumption disappears, leverage disappears with it. Carney confirmed that Canada was close to an agreement before the Reagan ad disrupted negotiations in October. A deal on steel, aluminum, and forestry was reportedly near completion when Trump abruptly terminated talks, citing the Ontario advertisement. When asked whether tariffs might be lower today if that ad hadn't aired, Carney didn't throw anyone under the bus. He acknowledged reality. A deal had been close. It didn't happen. And the terms from Canada's perspective were still valid. Then he moved forward calmly, strategically. Doug Ford, meanwhile, defended the ad proudly. He pointed out its massive reach and its purpose, getting the attention of Americans themselves. The difference in tone wasn't a fracture. It was a division of roles. Carney represented precision, patience, and long-term economic strategy. Ford represented pressure, political instinct, and blunt force messaging. One reassured markets, the other rattled assumptions. Together, they formed a combination Washington didn't plan for: unity without uniformity. That unity mattered more than the ad itself because it showed Canada could absorb friction without losing coherence. No panic, no retreat, no internal collapse, just a steady message. Deals are still possible, but intimidation doesn't accelerate them. What's unfolding right now isn't just another trade dispute. It's a reset. For decades, Canada approached negotiations with the quiet assumption that it had more to lose, that access to the U.S. market was something to protect at almost any cost. That era is ending, not with drama, but with discipline. Canada is now walking into negotiations with something it didn't fully have before: options, energy leverage built on clean, abundant power, critical minerals the world is competing for, expanding ports, diversified trade routes, agreements that stretch far beyond North America. These aren't theoretical advantages. They are active alternatives. And alternatives change behavior. The United States is discovering that demands don't carry the same weight when the other side isn't cornered, that tariffs don't intimidate when they accelerate self-reliance, that threats lose effectiveness when they reveal dependence instead of dominance. None of this requires hostility. Canada isn't walking away. It isn't slamming doors or burning bridges. It's simply refusing to kneel. What makes this moment different is how quietly it's happening. No chest thumping, no retaliation spirals, just firm lines, calm responses, and an insistence that sovereignty isn't something you trade away piece by piece. When Canada says not negotiable, it's not posturing. It's stating boundaries built on real leverage. This doesn't mean cooperation is over. It means cooperation has conditions: mutual benefit, respect, stability. If the United States wants integrated supply chains, reliable resources, and long-term partnership, Canada is ready for that conversation. But the assumption of automatic compliance is gone. In its place is something far more durable: confidence. And once a country negotiates from confidence instead of fear, the balance of power changes permanently. This is my personal viewpoint and perspective. That's all for today's news. Thank you for tuning in. If this breakdown showed you something the headlines missed, subscribe and turn on notifications. Because understanding these shifts isn't just about following global news, it's about recognizing when the rules have quietly changed.